Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I'm your MC and chief cook and bottle washer. I'm Bob Boro, for those who don't know me. I got a call from the chair of the Federation Events Committee, Leah Press here, and she said, would you join my committee and help us create some events? And I said, of course I will. So we got together and we couldn't figure out what to do, and we came up with the idea of honoring the founders of the Jewish community. And this is to say, the Jewish community from Visalia to Merced. So we have some representatives from those extreme ends. I want to introduce Leah to say hello.
Hello. For those who don't know me, my name is Leah Press, and thank you all so much for coming today. And on behalf of the Jewish Federation of Central California, I want to welcome you. And as Bob explained, what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be learning about the history of the Fresno Jewish community. And we're also going to be honoring some legacy members, some centenarians who are in our community, who have contributed substantially to having our community be the way it is today. And you have met Bob. But let me tell you a little bit about Bob. Bob was born and raised here in the Central Valley, and he spent his whole life here. And in fact, he lived in close proximity to many of the legacy members of our community who helped found our community, and knows a lot about their history. In fact, he has a very wide depth and breadth of knowledge about our community. So he is someone who is very knowledgeable about our community. And also he has given back to the community. He hasn't just acquired knowledge, but he's given back to the community. He was a member of the Jewish Federation for many years, and he was even president of the Federation for many years. So, okay. Can you hear it now?
What, it reverberates? Is it reverberating?
All right.
Can we use this mic?
Should I start over, or you've got enough?
No,
Okay,
don't
all
start
right. Well, we could drag it on for a while. Anyways, so Bob has been here for a long time, and in fact, I think we could say that you are one of our legacy members. Now, you're not a centenarian just yet, but you are one of the legacy members who have brought a lot to our community, and we want to thank you for all your work to make this community the way we have it today. And now, Bob will be our MC.
Publicity I do not need, thank you. But it's just a pleasure to give to my community on all levels. And I come from a family that always lived that way, so it's just sort of I call it a family disorder. I want to tell you that we're going to watch two 10-minute videos, interviews I did with the two centenarians. And I think I'm going to begin with that, and then I'm going to have some presentation of certificates from the city for them, which will allow Councilmember Carbasi to get on to his next event on Sunday morning. And thank you for joining us. Let's have a round of applause. And then I'm going to introduce Gianna Galar, Francis, right? Where are you? Francis. I know her by too many names. Who did a lot of research on the early history of Fresno community and created the content for our Jewish history unit out at the fairgrounds in the History Museum. So she's going to give a short presentation, and then we're going to talk about early families. But right now, I'm going to have Rabbi Rick show you the first interview of 105-year-old, am I too quick here? Martin Weil, whose family is here today, some of them, and you'll get the drift from the interview.
And Martin's here with us online.
Zooming. Good morning. I'm Bob Boro, and I'm here on behalf of the Jewish Federation of Central California, interviewing my friend, Marty Weil, whom I've known all my life,
Good to see you, Bob.
It's good to see you, Marty. And we're talking about founders in the Jewish community, legacy members who have been supporters and pillars. And Marty, you have been, but how old are you now?
I'm going to be 106.
And so last month you turned 105.
April 14th.
See, he's counting on his 106th year already. He's thinking forward, which is why I love him. So, Marty, where were you born and raised?
I was born in New York, in the Bronx. And of course, I was raised there until I came to California after the war and married, and got married.
Right. And then you went back to the East Coast, or you went to Oregon after that, after you married?
Yeah,
You lived in Oregon, or you lived back in the Bronx?
no.
Oregon.
Never went back.
Okay. What year did you come to Fresno?
1952.
I was 3 years old when I met you. Do you remember me?
I remember your mother invited us for dinner, Leo and I,
Yeah, when you first came to meet.
when we first came.
Yeah, I remember too. Well, my entire childhood was intertwined with your family and your brother's family. And of course, Stephen and I were good friends, and Elaine and I. And I know all your grandchildren and your great-granddaughter. I'm so thrilled to interview you today.
She's a good friend of yours,
Yes.
Lucy.
Well, not a good friend, but someone that I admire very much.
She could be a good friend,
She's
but
fabulous.
she's always happy.
I know. She should be happy. She has fabulous parents and a great-grandfather. So, when you arrived in Fresno, at what point did you join the Jewish community? Tell me a little bit about your
We
involvement.
arrived.
And what did you do first? Did you go to the synagogue?
Yeah.
But you were raised Orthodox, right? You had an upbringing that was Orthodox or more Reform?
It was neither Orthodox nor Reform.
Okay,
It was, I belonged to a Jewish tribe.
there you go. I like that. So when you went to Temple Beth Israel, it was a good fit for you and Marion. I can remember, so you must have joined in 1952, 1953.
We arrived.
Yeah, 1952. Well, I can remember as a child, Michael Loring, our cantor, used to write fabulous Purim plays. And the only reason that the kids were able to act and perform was because the stage manager was your wife, Marion. And she was so organized, and she was so fun, and she did all the costumes, and she helped us with our lines. And,
That's right.
oh, it was
I'm
fabulous.
very proud of how she
Just fabulous.
worked with the kids.
And of course, over the years, she was instrumental in managing Hadassah and keeping it going and alive. Tell me, were you ever on the board of directors for the synagogue, for Temple Beth Israel?
Yes, I was on the board.
And what were your jobs on the board?
Well, I was treasurer for
years.
several years.
7 years. Yeah.
Several years.
Yeah. And were you ever did you have other officers? Were you in other positions on the board, or just treasurer?
I was treasurer.
How many years do you think you served on the board?
Probably about maybe 6 or 8 years.
Interesting. And then you were also on the Jewish Federation board. It was called the Jewish Welfare Federation then. I was on for 20 years, and I know you were on much before I came and much longer after I left. But you were always the treasurer.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was president of the Federation for 2 years, you
The
were,
reason I was treasurer is because I had an accounting background.
I remember, from before you came to Fresno. Yeah,
Well,
yeah. Your whole education.
I graduated from NYU with a business majoring in accounting.
Yeah, I remember you telling me that before.
Yeah.
So on the Federation, we had a fairly complicated accounting system because there were all kinds of restricted funds. And whenever we presented the budget for the next year, I relied on you when I was president to analyze it, and you always had very insightful questions. And I used
I would sit with Rabbi Greenberg and we would make up a budget.
right, and it was not easy to do
But it wasn't difficult.
compared to business, huh?
Uh,
But there were the Free Loan Society, and there was the restricted funds that had been set aside, and donations and that sort of thing. It was a bit of a challenge. And tell me about your kids. They went through the Sunday school. I know that Stephen was bar mitzvahed. Was Elaine bat mitzvah? I can't remember.
Elaine was the first bat mitzvah.
No kidding.
She went to Greenberg and said, I want to be bar mitzvah. Because the girls at that time were bat mitzvah.
Right, right.
But she and I forgot who the other girl was.
I don't remember either. I believe that Louise Strauss had a bat mitzvah a few years before that, but I don't know for sure. I'm pretty sure.
She was the first one.
Yeah, I'll be darned. So now tell me a little bit about the Jewish community, because there were many times in the Federation where somebody wanted to borrow some money from the Free Loan Society, but they had to have someone co-sign the loans. Did you ever do that for a business person?
And we built the new school.
Ah, tell me about the school. You bought some we
We
owned
used to have a school in a little house behind the temple.
Yeah, it was a two-story bungalow, and it was
Yeah.
very
We were involved with architects, and I had them draw up the building we built it.
I remember that. It was a very well-done building.
Yeah.
And you did that, did Leo help with that too, your brother?
Leo and I.
Yeah. And so how did they finance the construction of that building?
How we went to what's his name, the banker? Mr.
A member of the Jewish community?
Yeah.
Gee, I don't
Who
remember.
was the banker?
Do you remember which bank?
Yeah, he signed his own bank.
I
Mr.
was very young then. I don't think I remember.
No, he was banking quite a few years after that.
Mhm. Well, okay, so then he gave a loan for the construction. Is that what happened?
Yeah.
And was there some seed money, like?
We co-signed for it.
I'll be darned. And then eventually the temple was able to pay off the loan, the mortgage, because they had it in the budget every
We
year.
raised the money, paid off.
Mhm. And what happened when they decided to sell the old facility because it was too small and wrong location, and they bought the land way out north where we are now? Were you involved in that acquisition at all?
Somewhat I was, yeah.
And of course, you supported the capital campaign, I'm sure. You gave money, I'm sure, to the new temple. Yeah. Well, Marty, that's great. So, what are your thoughts about the Jewish community now? I mean, your kids were members of the temple when they were younger. They went to Sunday school. You have Isaac now, who attends your grandson, and who attends the synagogue.
I'm not really not familiar with the new members of the temple.
Right. Well, you're very isolated here. You can't walk around and go out like you used to.
I can't walk.
Yeah.
I had a stroke. My left side is kind of paralyzed.
You'd never know it. You'd never know it.
But I have very little use of my arm and my leg.
Mm-hmm. Well, your attitude is fabulous. You've got lots of love and support around you, and that's the most important thing. I want to thank you very much for talking to me this morning.
Is that all you want to know?
Yeah, because we're having a short program on Sunday, a week from Sunday, and we're going to put it on Zoom so you can watch
Is there
it.
anything else I could help you with? I'll be very happy to do that.
No, I think you've helped the entire community your whole life, and that's all I ask of you. Thank you very much.
No.
This was such a pleasure for me to interview Marty, and an equal pleasure is to interview George Wallet, who is here today, and we're going to watch his interview. Good morning, everyone. I'm Bob Boro, and I am here in the home of George Wallet, who in August will be 103 years old, a member of our Jewish community since the early 40s, when he was stationed at Hammer Field during the military. And he's going to tell us a little bit about his history and a little bit about coming to Fresno. And being that we're celebrating the founders and the legacy of early Jewish community, George has been a pillar of the shul and the Federation and our Jewish community in general, so we're going to chat about that. Good morning.
Good morning.
It's great to be here.
Thank you. It's very nice to be here too.
I realize I've known you my whole life.
Yeah, and then some.
Yeah. So just in a nutshell, tell us about your arrival in Fresno, the circumstances.
This is during the Second World War. I was stationed in Utah, took my basic training there, and got on a train, and we didn't know where the train was going because everything was a secret. Anyway, we landed in a town. I saw my first palm tree, and the train was very slowly going on P Street, and I was in between cars on the platform there, and there was a man walking alongside of the train, and I yelled down to him and I said, "Hey fella, what's the name of this town?" He said, "Fresno." I said, "What state are we in?" He said, "California." I said, "What's that sweet smell in the air?" He says, "Oh, those are the orange blossoms." I said, "I'm in heaven. Palm trees, orange blossoms, things that Boston never had." Okay.
And you were from where?
Boston.
Boston.
Yeah. And I learned that there was no snow here, which was wonderful. You want to go to the snow, in an hour's ride, you're up at the snow. If you want to go to the water, 2.5 hours or maybe, you're at the water. This is ideally located, and I love it here.
So you came to do some basic training at Hammer Field?
No, to be assigned a job.
Okay. Assigned a job.
And how I got assigned to a job was I was in a replacement depot, and then I was shipped out across the street to the hospital. And we all lined up to be assigned to a bunk. And the man who assigned us, his name was Sergeant Goodman. So I said to myself, gee, I wonder if this man's Jewish, because Goodman can be a nice Jewish name. Anyway, after everything was done, I went over to him, and in Yiddish I said, "Du bist a Yid?" And he says, "Yeah." I said, he said, what did you do? I said, "I'm a pharmacist." He said, "Don't go to the pharmacy." He said, because the man who is in charge of it is a 90-day wonder, and that is, they send them to school for 90 days, and then they are what they went to school for. He says, and anybody who's a licensed pharmacist gets shipped out. So he says, you know, you can do lab work? And I says, yeah. He says, I'll sign you to the laboratory. Well, I had never done any clinical laboratory work. So anyway, I learned how to do urinalysis, blood, complete blood counts, all kinds of stuff. And it was a very nice education. So I was skilled in two things now, pharmacy and clinical laboratory.
And what year was that?
That was in 1942, 1943 was when most of this happened.
Okay, so let's fast forward just in the interest of time. So then you went back to Boston.
Yes, after the war was over, I got married during the war, and my wife was from Boston. And I had been working down at Long's Drug. I was offered a job there, but my wife was homesick and wanted to go home. So we went home. I was very unhappy there. It is totally different living in the East Coast than it is in the West Coast, believe me. So anyway, I just decided that we were going to go back to Fresno. And I had a job waiting for me, and I went to work for Norman Rudy's drugstore.
And that was on the west side.
That's on the west side.
So this is to say, George, that you were in a community of low-income people, very diverse ethnic diversity and colors,
Yeah.
and you were integrated into that neighborhood. You took care of those people.
Oh, yes, yes.
How Jewish?
No, really. The store that I had, it was a large store. Actually, what happened was the Safeway that was there, they closed up, and I wound up buying the Safeway building. And we changed the drugstore from a 2,000 square foot to a 15,000 square foot. And I had been working there so long. I worked there we owned the store for 3 generations. And a lot of people, black people, if anybody, any white man walked in, he was either a salesman or he was looking for directions. I said I had myself and the bookkeeper and one of my pharmacists were the only white people in the store. The secret is to have a black partner and then to hire nothing but colored, tan, and black people to work in the store, and we got along very well, and it was a very good success, and I wound up selling the store about 10 years ago.
And you had partners who were other pharmacists
Oh, yeah.
of color, right?
Yeah, I had 2 Japanese partners, 1 black partner, 1 Armenian partner, and myself, okay?
Okay, so now I'm going to interrupt you, again in the interest of time. So at some point, since you had been raised Orthodox, and you were Glatt kosher in Boston, you're in Fresno, you don't have a synagogue or a shul that meets your needs. What did you do?
Well, I first went over to the temple because it was the only game in town, okay? And it just didn't feel right. I had been raised as an Orthodox Jew in Boston, and I mean really Orthodox. My mother had a Glatt kosher kitchen, and everything was okay. And so then I met a bunch of men who we decided to join the conservative synagogue, okay? They didn't have a building, so we would meet in the library of the temple, which worked out very nicely. And then we decided that we had better get a building, so we started to raise money. And
Give me an idea of what year that was.
I haven't the 40s.
40s or 50s?
No. It was in the 40s.
40s.
Yeah, it was in the 40s. So anyway, Alex and Morris Horowitz got us some land on Shields Avenue, and we decided to build a shul there, and we had a nice shul built up. We were loaded with people. We had about 125 families, and during the high holidays, we had a real packed building. We had to fill the social hall and the sanctuary in order to accommodate the crowds that we had. Mm-hmm. The biggest problem we had was getting a rabbi and also getting a cantor for the high holy days. Mm-hmm. But we managed to get that.
So let's fast forward. You are still involved in the shul after all these years. What is your position?
My position for the last 20 years has been treasurer of the shul. It seems as though when you get to be an officer in our shul, it's a lifetime stay. Witness Ephraim Hodges has been the president for the last 15, 20 years. Nobody wants a job. And as you all know, we sold the building because we were down to Saturday morning services. If 3 men showed up, that was a lot. So what I did was I offered my home for Saturday morning services, and we have services, but not, we don't make a million, that's it.
Yeah. So now the shul offered office spaces for years to the Jewish Federation,
Yeah.
which is now the Jewish Federation of Central California. Now, have you been active in the Federation all these years? You've certainly been a patron.
I really, all I've done is just donate.
That's all you need to do,
Yeah,
especially when you're the treasurer of the
Yeah.
shul.
yeah, that's all I do.
Well, today we're really appreciating the founders of the Jewish community. And now the Jewish community was in existence in the 1800s, but we didn't have a synagogue or a shul until the late 20s and then in the late 40s. So you really are sort of on the ground floor here.
Oh, yeah,
And
yeah,
what we're doing is we're interviewing you and Marty Weil because you're over 100 years old and doing so well, and we have an opportunity to say thank you and to look a little bit at your background and how you came here and why you came here, and I just so appreciate you talking to me.
you're very welcome. It's a real pleasure.
Yeah, and we'll continue this conversation.
Good,
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
thank you.
Of course, George is with us today, and we're going to ask you a lot of questions and put you on the spot. It's my pleasure to introduce our council member from this northern district here, Mike Carbasi, and we have asked him to present a certificate of appreciation to Martin Weil and to George here, so I'll give the mic to him.
All right, thank you. Yeah, don't clap before you hear what I have to say. No, I'm kidding. So, you know, if you turn on the news today, you'll see, especially on the cable networks, all the differences we have, whether it's within political parties here in America or different races and religions and people and nations across the world, which is very unfortunate because you don't focus on the positive. One thing you'll find, no matter how you ended up in Fresno, no matter what your heritage is, there are certain themes that unify us, and one of them is honoring our elders, our parents especially, our grandparents, and those that created the legacies that allow us to live here in relative peace in what I think is the greatest country in the world. So I think it's so great that we are here for the very first, and what do you call this, the inaugural event to honor those that did leave a legacy for the Jewish community. And one other common theme when you are an immigrant in this country is you struggle. There is a lot of adversity out there, especially in Northwest Fresno, when being Jewish or being Armenian or being black or Persian or what have you meant you were redlined and couldn't live here. And look what we've done since then, right? So I think it is fantastic that we get to recognize two special people, and I think both are from Northwest Fresno as well. So that's even great for me. Makes me feel proud, having been your council member. For Mr. Weil, who's watching, you have a very proud family. Your nephew, Doug, is very proud of you. And we have this proclamation he is going to bring you shortly, which I'll talk about in a moment. And earlier, I had the opportunity to speak to Mr. Wallet very briefly. Thank you for that. And he did tell me the orange blossom story. Now, we have a big problem in Fresno recruiting people to move here, kind of like you have the problem getting a rabbi here. That's the key, orange peel. So whenever we interview, I'm just going to spray orange peel scent in the office, and they'll want to move to Fresno. So thank you so much. So as this is the first inaugural, this is a proclamation from the city of Fresno, and we will be committed to doing this every year there's going to be a lot of more people to honor. So this, I'm going to read the very last part, 'cause it's rather long. And you're going to be 103. We want to make sure you make it to 104. I don't want to bore you. So now, therefore, be it resolved that we, Mayor Jerry Dyer, and the Fresno City Council do hereby proclaim Sunday, June 2nd, 2024 to be Jewish Founders Day, honoring Martin Weil and George Wallet.
Great. You want to speak into the microphone?
Yeah, first of all, I would like to thank those people who thought enough to put this thing together. Okay, not an easy thing to get round up a bunch of Jews on a Sunday morning. Okay, so anyway, I'm very grateful. Okay, I want to also thank my caretaker, Sabrina, my daughter and her husband, my daughter Sarah and her husband Kevin Mitchell. I've had a wonderful life here. I thank God for everything that has happened to me, okay? When I went in the Army, I was a boy. When I came out, I was a man, and I knew what I needed to do, and I did it, okay? I'm very sorry that the shul was not able to be maintained, okay? When we first started, when I was younger, okay, I had 3 children. They all went to Cheder, okay? We had a bunch of Army guys who decided that Fresno was a pretty good place to live, okay? And they were mainly from the East, the East Coast. A bunch of guys from New York, Philadelphia, all over the place, but they thought Fresno was great. And it is. It's been a wonderful place. I am so happy. I can just tell you one thing. When I was living back in Boston and you met somebody, the first thing they asked you was what are you? And what they wanted to know was what religion you were. And I can honestly tell you that when I came to California, nobody ever asked what I was. I was taken at face value, okay? And no, it's just a heavenly place. That's it, okay? So thank you all again for coming here.
We're going to have more questions for George as we continue, but I want to get Councilmember Carbasi on the road. Yeah, this one, Isaac. This is Marty Weil's grandson, Isaac Weil, who has always been active in the synagogue, and his mother, Ronnie, and father, Michael, with him. Not Michael, Stephen. Okay. Well, do you want to read them?
Yes, well, we are not very, we're lazy in government, so it says the same thing. But for Mr. Weil, who's watching, it does say that, therefore be it resolved that the mayor, Jerry Dyer, and the Fresno City Council do proclaim today, Sunday, June 2nd, 2024, to be Jewish Founders Day, honoring Martin Weil.
Well, I can't tell you how much our committee appreciates Councilmember Carbasi giving up his Sunday morning. He did get fed, I hope, yeah. And we really do appreciate it. I know you have another function to go to,
Yeah.
and thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Great. Well, you know, you could probably tell I had a lot of fun doing those interviews. It was not a job at all. I'm going to invite Gianna Francis to come up and give us kind of a context for the early Jewish community. So why did Jews come to California? Why did they come to Fresno? And she's done a lot of research for the history exhibit. I'm going to then speak about the families, and then we're going to have a cordless mic passed around. Anybody who wants to share some information about your own family history, I'd like that. Gianna's looking at this big thing I did in 2012 for the HMO brunch for Hadassah, which was honoring Martin and Marianne Weil, and we'll talk a little more about that later. Do you want to hold this or put it in the thing? Or you want to try this and see how it works? Francine, let us know if you can hear this one.
I'm trying this and letting you know if it works. And I have one totally clogged up ear, so I can't hear myself. So I will have to depend on your feedback if I'm too loud or too quiet. So,
Can you hear?
okay. So I want to start by correcting Bob a teeny tiny bit and saying that Amy Schmidt and I did a lot of research on the Jews of Fresno. And in fact, Jack Benninga did some of our early research also on the Jews of Fresno. So this was a joint venture, but I'm the lucky one who gets to talk to you about them. So what Bob and I decided I would do is let you know sort of tell you about the foundation, the Jews that laid the groundwork even before our legacy members came on the scene. So the very, very earliest Jewish families to arrive in Fresno. The story of the first Jewish settlers in Fresno reflects the greater story of Jewish immigration in the broader American West. Very, very similar story. In the West, it's like right in my eyes. In the West, Jews closely followed the original settlers, the miners, the explorers, the railroad workers, and the farmers. Jews came with merchandise. Jews came in wagons and in ships. They brought anything they thought would sell in this vast new territory that had literally nothing with which to start. They may have begun as poor peddlers, but soon they opened small stores that featured dry goods, cattle feed, and other necessary supplies. This is also how the first settlers in Fresno began. Fresno was founded by the railroad in 1872, and by 1874, Louis Einstein had opened the Pioneer Store, Jewish. The Jews of Fresno did not remain just shopkeepers for long. This was the heady period in the in Western American history when Jews were welcomed into all aspects of society, kind of like George was speaking about. In such a young economy with everything in flux, there was room for everybody and no room for anti-Semitism. Our earliest Jewish pioneers became an integral part of Fresno. Jews helped to establish the public library system, the parks and recreation system, the Masons, and the first volunteer fire brigade. They invested heavily in public utilities and masterminded the first successful agricultural colony in the county. In some cases, because their shops extended credit to the farmers, they eventually also became bankers, opening some of the first savings and loans in Fresno. I know when I first moved to Fresno, there was still Guarantee Savings and Loan. How many of you recognize that name? Well, that was founded by actually the same man who founded the Pioneer Store. That was Louis Einstein. And as an aside, which might interest everybody, and I didn't include this in the museum, his son changed his last name to Eaton. So if you've ever walked the Eaton Trail or seen Eaton Park, they are the descendants of that first Louis Einstein. Now, this access to civic participation and upward mobility was the opposite of the situations from the lands they had emigrated. Our first Fresno Jews were part of the great wave of German immigration in the mid-1800s. The wave of immigration followed the failed liberal revolutions of 1848, if you know your European history. Disappointment with this failure, the conservative reaction to the revolutions, and subsequent economic downturn all contributed to the need for Jews to flee Central Europe. There, these Jews had suffered from discriminatory economic legislation that restricted them from many trades and professions. Their right to settle in certain places and to marry was restricted. They had no chance for upward mobility, let alone to participate in civic life. The promise of economic freedom in America lured them across the ocean. Through chain migration, they followed family members and community acquaintances to the States. Some remained in the East Coast and founded some of the Jewish dynasties that we know of there. Others, like our Fresno forefathers, made their way across the plains or over the Panama Crossing to help found the West. Unfortunately, in their newfound heady freedom, many fell to the lure of assimilation. The majority of big Jewish names of early Fresno, Kuttner, Goldstein, Einstein, Marx, Guntelfinger, are lost to the Jewish community because of assimilation. We do know of only 2 from this initial wave who continued and contributed to the growth of the Jewish community. One was Ben Epstein, and I don't see Michelle Rabin here, but Ben is her great-great-great-grandfather. And he was an early shop owner, made his way across the ocean at the age of 14, an orphan, and found his way to Fresno and set up a little shop. And of course, the other is Herman and Goldie Levy, whom Bob will speak of later, I'm sure, and I hope. So those people, along with members of the subsequent wave of East European Jews that most of us are descended from, went on to found our Jewish community. And for that story, I turn you back to Bob.
I picked the right speaker, didn't I? Yeah, maybe that could be a link in the temple, in the Federation newsletter. Phyllis, can we put that as a link in the Federation newsletter? Thank you. Well, you heard the allusion to my great-grandfather, Herman Levy, and his wife, Goldie. So I'm going to begin there, and I don't want to belabor my family because I want to open it up to everyone, but this is very interesting in the context of the founding of the community. In 1872, Herman Levy, as a 19-year-old, left Fellin, Germany, and sojourned to the West Coast. He had an uncle named Theodore Jacobs, who was a single man in Merced, who sponsored him. And he didn't linger in Merced. I don't think there were opportunities for business there, but Jacobs was a legacy for Stanford University, where he had studied, and he actually left $1 million way back in the 1800s when he died. And when my daughter was applying to Stanford, she said, "Do you have any legacies?" I said, "Of course not." I didn't even think about that. Wouldn't have mattered, by the way. So he took the train down to Borden, which is about Avenue 12 in Madera. And if you got off on one side of the tracks, the land was owned by Dr. Borden. It was called Borden. If you got off on the other side of the track from the train car, it was a different name. He opened a dry goods store, and he couldn't make a go of it. There wasn't enough population and business. So he folded up shop, came to Fresno, a couple miles south, and went to work for Kuttner Goldstein. So I'm imagining from what Gianna says that there was a large sales force in Kuttner Goldstein of German immigrants, many of whom were Jewish, and he probably didn't speak any English at the time. And eventually he had enough savings to open his own store, and then he brought a bride from Vallejo, my great-grandmother Goldie, and they came to she came to Fresno. They married up there in San Francisco or Vallejo. Anyway, long story short, they had 4 sons. The oldest was my grandfather, Herbert Levy, and the next was Leon Levy, and then Sigmund Levy and Benjamin Levy. They were all members of the synagogue, but the synagogue didn't exist yet. They were all graduates of Fresno High School. So imagine that my grandfather was born in downtown Fresno in 1888. Then he had a bride he brought from Oakland named Madeline Schumann Levy, and they had a son, Herb Levy Jr., whose grandson, Bert Levy, is an appellate court justice here in Fresno and a member of this temple. Bert and Mary Lee, and they have 2 sons. So you see that the generations continue from the founders, which is what we're here to talk about today. Let's see. Leon Levy married very late in his 40s to an extraordinary woman from Scotland. They had no children, and contributed a great deal to the Jewish community. And then there was Sigmund Levy, who was married and had 2 sons, Robert and Gordon, who had tremendous careers in the world, I won't elaborate on, and they were also outside of Fresno, they left. And then Ben Levy had 2 daughters, both of whom had children here and went to Sunday school and so on. So that very first legacy was quite extraordinary. So I was at Goldie Venus's cousins up in Oakland for Pesach back in 1970 when I was at Berkeley. And a Jewish woman about 4 feet tall came over to me and said, I was married to your cousin, Jules Steen. And I said, and what is your name? And she said, Lucille Steen. And I said, I think you're confusing me with someone else. Oh, no, you're Robert. I said, well, where were you raised? Fresno, California. And when did you leave? 1916. And then she proceeded to tell me, which nobody ever knew about, that in the dry goods store that Herman and Goldie had, they had a Torah, and on Friday nights, they would hold Shabbat services. My great-grandmother would cover all the dry goods with white sheets, and the Jewish community that was interested in observing Shabbat would come to the dry goods store. Now that's history that's never been written. And if I hadn't been at that Seder, I wouldn't even be able to tell you about that. The other thing, I said, well, when did you, how do you know all this? She says, well, I moved to San Francisco in 1916, and this was all before that. So Herman Levy was a founder of the temple. I don't know how many other founders there were. I think that history's been discarded. But in any case, the building was not built when he died. He died fairly young. So I think the temple downtown was built maybe 1929. And the people who built that building, I know, were the Mazer brothers. The Maisler, they had a lumber company that was extremely successful. In fact, it was so successful they kept their books in 2 languages. The IRS saw the English books, and the real books were in Yiddish. Common knowledge. One day, Rabbi Greenberg and Estelle went to Romania to tour synagogues, and they went to the synagogue where the Maislers had grown up as small children. And he said, we were dumbfounded. The synagogue that they built on Calaveras was a duplicate of their childhood synagogue. Little known fact. So that was probably late 20s, early 30s. I don't know where it was in relation to the Depression and the stock market crash. Then, does anybody know any other founders' names from the beginning of the temple? Because you see, at that time, all they had was B'nai B'rith, and Herman Levy had brought B'nai B'rith here between 1900 and 1905. And that was the only Jewish community they had. And I'm hoping that Steve Nagin yes, Gianna. Is it part of the exhibit? Is it in your archives or in part of the exhibit? Well, would you do us a favor and add a postscript note on your when we put the link on the Federation and okay. We'll do it later. We'll do it later. Okay. So now, if we want to fast forward, there was a rabbi at the temple who was single, and he was hired. And he disappeared one day with one of the congregants' wives. This was the very first rabbi they hired, I think. You didn't know that story? So Rabbi Greenberg had just graduated from Hebrew Union College, and he was single also. And they said, we'd like to offer, he was from Stockton, we'd like to offer you the job, but you have to marry. He said, why do I have to marry? He said, we can't hire another single rabbi. It's too damaging to the congregation. So he was already courting Estelle Greenberg, his wife, and she was in Chicago, and they married and took a train out to California, and I think he was a rabbi here for 52 years, wasn't he? Certainly the only rabbi I knew in childhood. He founded the Jewish Welfare Federation, and he ran it as executive director, and Bel Goren, who was the temple secretary, was the secretary of the federation. There was a board of directors, and that, I don't know what year that was founded, but it must have been in the late 40s or early 50s. And there were many people who supported the federation. The Ice family had Fresno Envelope, and they did all the mailings. All of the bulletins were printed by the Nagin family. Is that right, Steve? Where are you? Yeah, so Steve's parents produced all of the written bulletins and everything and invitations for the Jewish Welfare Federation and for Temple Beth Israel as well. It's quite a legacy. And Steve, their son or grandson, son, has been a temple member for years and president for a number of years. So I got to watch this legacy continue from where I was sitting. And then there was the beginning of the shul, which is quite an extraordinary story because, as we know from all the different movements of Judaism in America, from Reform to Conservative to Reconstructionist to I don't know what, besides, of course, traditional Orthodoxy, there really was a void for a more conservative shul. And it was wonderful that they were able to use the library at the temple to form that. And I think I'd like to know, and maybe we can ask George, since he was here very early on. And maybe others of you here can help. I want to ask, who were the founders of the synagogue? Who were the first group that you met with?
I wasn't a founder. Actually, the Schwartz brothers were.
Schwartz brothers?
Yeah. They were the founders of the shul, to my knowledge.
And so was one of them married to Renee Schwartz? Oh, that would have been Mervyn and Marvin. Huh?
Mervyn and Marvin.
Okay,
yeah.
got it.
And their father.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Anybody else?
Not that I know of. It's before my time.
Well, was it already existing when you hooked up with him?
No, what you have to realize is I was just a young GI when I first went to the synagogue. I came here and I went to the temple for maybe about 3 or 4 months when I could get leave, okay? And then we got together and we were able to make a minyan, and then we're talking about getting a rabbi.
Yeah, in 1933, Dr. Philip Richtel came to Fresno, and he was a member of the shul. Do you think that that the shul was existing then, Mel? 1930s is awfully early, huh? Yeah, probably later in the 30s or maybe 40s. Anybody know when the shul began? You were what? 1954?
They were already gathering together in the 1950th hall in downtown Fresno. When the temple became a little bit of a conflict where they got too big of a group, and so they left the temple, even though, people weren't asking them to leave. They left because it was too big of a group, and they started meeting in the 1950th hall, and that's when the group, in about 1951, 52, decided that they were going to create this temple that, or this,
Congregation Beth Jacob.
they started collecting money, and in about I think it's 1954, they finally had a building. So that's when the building.
Okay, thank you.
And there were probably maybe 10 to 15, about 10 to 15 families that were very involved in the actual physical building of that.
Great. I'm sure it was the Horwitzes and the Richtels and I don't know.
Yeah, the Mandels were
Mandel.
there, and then it was shortly after that when they didn't have a rabbi that Sid Mandel said, well, my father wants to move out because now we have grandchildren. He has grandchildren, and he's going to move out from Chicago. So they got Rabbi Lazowick there. He was not the first rabbi, but one of the first rabbis. And they would often get visiting cantors, but at some point, even Sid Mandel would pinch hit as cantor and had
he was here. He had moved here to be in the radio business from Chicago. He came to open a radio station in the early 50s. And so that's how they came to be here, and they had Rabbi Laswell.
Introduce yourself.
Oh,
and
I'm
your
sorry.
and your family name.
I'm Carol Drucker, and my family, Elaine and Saul Drucker, came here in about 1950, 51, and they had come from New York. My grandfather was a produce broker and traveled all over the valley during the summer harvest. And they were here in Fresno, and my parents came from Brooklyn, New York, and came to Fresno, and that summer, and absolutely fell in love with Fresno. They went back, they packed up their apartment, they moved here, lock, stock, and barrel, and made Fresno their home. And my father was hired by numerous people, Jewish merchants, and he often worked for them in sales, and was very involved in the development of Congregation Beth
That's
Jacob.
great. And you remember the shul from your
Oh, I
early
remember from my
childhood.
childhood. We had fundraisers there called Market Day that were not to be beat. There were food booths, and there were games, and it was a huge fundraiser every single year. Market Day was a wonderful, joyous occasion, and it was always such a busy time. During the High Holy Days, there were so many people that came from surrounding areas and enjoyed the synagogue. And we had a wonderful Sunday school. I think that was one of the reasons why they developed Beth Jacob, because they had young children and they wanted to provide a Jewish education for them. And I still remember that they had these little short tables that were handmade by all the gentlemen of the soon-to-be Congregation Beth Jacob. And the tops of the tables were provided by A&M Flooring, and it was linoleum. And I'll never forget that speckled linoleum as long as I live.
Great.
Yeah, probably filled with asbestos. And there we were writing on them and having such a joyous life. But the Sunday school was just so much fun, and they did fundraisers, and they did, Jewish holidays, and it was a wonderful life for us.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
We're right up against 12 o'clock. I would like to have a few more people speak. Can I see a show of hands of people who cannot stay? Okay, we won't be too much longer. I would like to call upon Betty Lee Wapner, whose father was very instrumental in the Jewish medical world here. We'll talk
Also
about
in the temple
when they
life.
arrived.
My father came here in 1928. The Richtels are here because of my father bringing them all out from Denver. The sanctuary at our temple was not built yet in 1928. They had a by the seat. And by the way, unfortunately, I was not available during the compilation of all the history of the temple. I have the original tags saved.
Really?
I took them off one by one when we came out to this property from the temple.
So it's a kind of a little known fact that Fresno, for residencies for new doctors, was one of the few places in all of America after the stock market crash during the Depression that actually paid an intern or a resident, I think it was $15 or $20 a month. And I know that when he brought physicians from Denver, they came because there was no other, they needed the money. They just, the Jews in Denver who were Orthodox really couldn't afford medical school, so they really had a tough time, and they had quotas. They're only allowed 2 per class, I think.
Well, they also came out to the Fresno County General Hospital because that's where my dad was the director.
Exactly.
Right,
Great.
so.
Now, how many kids were in your family? You had
I'm
bro-
sorry.
How many kids in your family?
Siblings. How many siblings did you have?
One brother deceased.
Yeah, got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for being here. How about Stanton Groger and also, oh yeah, we want to talk about Visalia people. Stuart, let's start with Stanton over here who's got his hand up. Again, early shul family.
Yeah,
to your face.
my mom was Janet Groger. My dad was Irving Groger. My mom was from the big city of Kerman, just outside of Fresno. My dad was stationed in Hammerfield. He was in the Army Air Corps, and he told the story of when he came out to Fresno. He never heard of Fresno, but he looked at a map, and he happened to see Raisin City, so he thought that was the big city. But anyway, so he was here, and he met my mom at the Rainbow Ballroom in downtown Fresno. And then they soon got married, and they were married by Rabbi Greenberg, and they made their life here, and they enjoyed being here. And my dad was involved with various fundraisings, including Beth Jacob. They had an annual fundraising called the Cadillac Dinner, which was very successful. But then in time, the car got too expensive, so they had to rename it 10 Grand Ball, because otherwise the car would have been too expensive. But anyway, they enjoyed being here and being part of the community. So the rest is all history.
And I'll say one more thing about Irving and Janet Groger. They ran a wholesale liquor, wine, and Dr. Brown soda distributorship. And anytime any Jewish organization, especially the Federation and the Shul or the Temple, needed wine, we got it at cost. They were just so gracious. You have another something to do?
Hang on.
The Rainbow Ballroom. During the war, that was the place, okay? Yeah.
Okay, we have the Sorsky family and we have the Nagin family back here.
Where am I going first? Point it real close.
Well, I didn't know that I was supposed to say anything. Anyways, my folks came right after the war, so 44, 45. My uncle had been here earlier at Valley, what was it, Valley General Hospital then? Where
County General Hospital.
County General. So Dr. Ginsburg, I think, was the head of the program. My uncle had come because there was a special program at the hospital that he wanted to be involved in.
And where were they from, the Sorskys? What city?
They were from Minneapolis.
Oh.
So my uncle studied in Minneapolis, London, came here. My dad went through law school in Minneapolis, and eventually my uncle got him to come to Fresno. And then their mother moved to Fresno. And my dad was in the furniture business, so then they all knew the Slaters.
Waxmans.
Yeah, there was a number of Jewish furniture stores.
And did they belong to the Shul or the Temple at that time?
No, they belonged to the Temple.
Okay, great.
Both families.
Moving on to Steve Nagin. And then I want to go across the aisle to the Britz family, to David Britz.
My parents, along with a number of other families who came here right after the war from the Rust Belt, Midwest and the East Coast. My parents came here in 1949. In fact, a couple of months after they got here, my brother was bar mitzvahed here in the temple. I was born in 1953 here. In those days, if you wanted jewelry, you went to Al Edmonds at Edmonds Jewelers, Sid Klenner at Baldwin's, Joe Broadstein at Leslie's. If you needed a doctor, you went to H.M. Ginsburg or Lee Snyder. If you needed your eyes exam, you went to Teddy Steinberg, and then Sid Ames made your glasses for you. If you needed a dentist, you went to Dave Silverman or, who was it?
Siegel?
No.
Simmons?
Yeah, at Simmons. It was the other Jewish dentist. So, I mean, and again, all the furniture stores and everything. In 1951, my father, Hy Ginsburg, Sid Marks, and Harry Sandler got together with Rabbi Greenberg, Monsignor Dowling, and Dean Malik. There used to be something in Fresno called Brotherhood Week, and it was an offshoot from the radio show that the three clergymen had as a weekly radio show here in Fresno.
It's called the Forum for Better
Better
Understanding.
understanding, yes. In fact, I think there's a small statue out here, a replica of the one that's in Courthouse Park. They decided to honor high school student athletes at the time. The first event was in 1952 with the 4 high schools that were in Fresno at the time: Edison High School, Roosevelt High School, Fresno High School, and San Joaquin Memorial. In those days, there was one person selected as a winner and got a $100 scholarship. This year we celebrated the 73rd annual event, which is maybe one of the longest running events in Fresno. We now have 18 high schools, and we gave out $11,000 in scholarships this year.
David, there's no family that's been more supportive to the Jewish community than the Brits family, and David's going to tell us when they came to Fresno and how they maneuvered.
Well, my father came from Germany in 1936 to escape Hitler because in those days they couldn't go to school. He went to work. He went to study at Berkeley and then Stanford in chemistry, and then after the war, he moved to Five Points, a little town about 40 miles southwest of here, and started his business and to exceed the American dream. He was a big supporter of the temple, and one of his pet peeves was the Jews should stick together. He told one congregant, I remember, this was like a teenager, when he said to this Jewish congregant, we need to stick together. We don't wait to another Holocaust before we do that. That still sticks to my mind. And like I said, when he went to, like the other fellows, needed a doctor, he went to a Jewish doctor. Dr. Simmons, the ear, nose, and throat doctor. And so he really believed in that, and he was good friends with Rabbi Greenberg. He was a little different than you, Rabbi Rick. He was more the traditional, but I think we really appreciate the rabbi with the guitar.
I'm a little taller too.
Yeah.
Thank you. So David has a brother Martin and a sister Linda Glassman, and the triumvirate are very supportive of everything. Mel?
Hi, I'm Mel Richtel. I hope this sounds better than it does from up there, but anyway.
Yeah, it's good.
Okay.
And they can hear you at home with that.
Okay. I was born in St. Agnes Hospital in Fresno. My father was a doctor here, and there's been a couple of mentions of Hy Ginsberg. Dr. Ginsberg, Betty Lee's dad, is responsible for my father coming to Fresno. From Denver, my father had been going to medical school at the University of Colorado. He lived in a little Jewish community in Denver, which is now exactly where Mile High Stadium is. And when he got out of medical school, at that time it was common for people to put in employment ads, no Jews need apply. And he was looking for work as a physician, and it wasn't coming easily, and Hy Ginsberg wrote him a note. He said, Phil, you got to come to Fresno. They'll hire Jews here at the Fresno, hospital, the general hospital. Well, he got on a train, and he had been raised in an Orthodox community. His mother and father never learned to speak English. He was proficient in Yiddish. The first year he got sent home from school because he didn't speak English, so his sister had to teach him that. And then he went on to, be a good scholar. And anyway, he came to the Fresno, and he was feeling that had never been outside of a Jewish community before, and he was very happy when he came in town that he saw people around that were dressed kind of like old style, and he heard what he thought was Yiddish from a distance, and he went and he spoke Yiddish to these people, but they were old Armenians. But he thought that was wonderful anyway, because he felt he had something in common with them, and he became did his residency. This had been in 1933 or so. He did his residency here in Fresno, and eventually he opened his own practice, and he practiced for, I guess into the almost 38 years at it. He had 3 kids, me, and my sister Estelle, who was married to Bob for a long time, and my sister Charlene. I remember going to Beth Jacob. My dad wouldn't go to Beth Israel because he thought it was too reform. And they had music, well, they had an organ in there, he says, which is like a Christian church. And but the real reason, he was kind of a shy man, and he was also not an institutional socializer. But so we went to the Beth Jacob because it was a little more rigorous. And I remember, going to Sunday school there. I think in my class was Didi Wallet, Doris Karen, Ruth Elkins, Herbie Boro, which was my favorite classmate in Sunday school because Rabbi Lazowick was kind of a disciplinarian, and I could make Herbie laugh no matter what. So I could get him in trouble all the time because he was laughing. But we had a good friendship, and it was nice. And in 1960, Sid Mandel, who was related to Lazowick, trained me for my bar mitzvah, and I had a big bar mitzvah at Beth Jacob. And right after that, there was high school kids and people I knew, and they were all going to Beth Israel. And my father had some antipathy for Beth Israel in this respect. He didn't think that Rabbi Greenberg was Zionist enough. And so that was off-putting to him. And he'd say, oh, he went there one time, and all he noticed was there was a lot of flies. That's all he said. Flies in Israel. So, and my father became less religious and more Zionistic than you can imagine. He turned being Jewish into worshiping Jewish people and Israel and the Zionist cause. I don't think there was a UJA dinner or event that I missed as a kid, and nor did he, and he was always giving to that. And but then we came to Beth Israel, and my father got to be kind of friendly with Rabbi Greenberg, who changed his stance a little bit, and we had good relations, and Rabbi Greenberg married Leslie and I, and here we are now. But I remember when this building was being born, my father, who didn't like to spend money on things he thought were, foolish, dug deep for this place because he wouldn't want to live in a town where there wasn't Jewish people. And so to that extent, if that makes him part of, a founder, or I don't know that it does, but that's what I recall from all of this, and it seems like there's a through line. And my mother was active in a lot of temple affairs, and so she was a good-hearted woman, and we're still connected.
Yeah, before we adjourn, we're going to talk about Hadassah, where she was very active. I want to hear from Visalia. Stuart's side in there? Oh, please.
You can.
You're welcome to come up here, sure. And be sure to introduce yourself.
Well, it seems like this Jewish area in the Central Valley has been here a lot longer than I have. I'm only here since 1986. But Visalia, in the mid-1800s, there were Jewish pioneers, Jewish merchants, who moved to Tulare and Kings County, and they established the newspaper. They established many stores. And in 1880, they even had a Visalia cemetery plot, which were only sold to Hebrews. And I have a history here if anybody would like to read it. So anyways, in 1948, there were Jewish families in Porterville, Springville, and Lindsay, which are little tiny towns around the area. They got together, meeting in each other's homes, and they created services following Orthodox practices, because that's what most of them were, which lasted about 18 months. And then in 57, there were 10 families that gathered together. They started a book of prayers, and they met every other week in also people's homes, following conservative practices, because most of those Orthodox people by that time had sort of either moved away or dropped out. And then in the 1958, the official name of Congregation B'nai David was chosen. And B'nai B'rith was also a part of that area. They brought in holidays, they came, they supported the Jewish families. And then in 1967, there was a Torah scroll by the Bleckman family who used to live in San Francisco, the 18th Street congregation that had disbanded. It was brought to Visalia. We still have it. In fact, we have 3 Torah scrolls. And then services began being conducted on a weekly basis. But Sunday school kids were brought up here because we didn't have a Sunday school down there at that time. And the Mitcheners who are here, I'm sure their daughters first started out that way. And then we bought property on Chenoweth Avenue into Visalia. And we also met at St. Paul's Episcopal. And the property on Chenoweth were homes, where there were 2 or 3 homes. They were renovated and remodeled. And the Bleckman family, we do have Lou Bleckman, who is 90 years old. He's a member of one of the original families. And we got our charter from the Reform Movement in 1980. And Cantor Michael Loring, who I heard before in one of the speeches, he used to come down and conduct services on a monthly basis. And then we started our student rabbi program in 1994. Prior to that, we had a part-time rabbi, which they went on to other things. We still have the student rabbi program. And we now have, in 1997, we broke ground on that same property on Chenoweth, which was a pretty large piece. We have a sanctuary, and we have a Jewish Educational Cultural Center. We only have about 55 families left in Visalia. People go on, they come in, they go out, and but we're growing, and we are still looking for a rabbi. We are still involved with the student rabbi. Our lay leaders are wonderful. They all come from Jewish backgrounds, and we're growing, and I'm privileged to be a member. Thank you.
That's very interesting, and we also appreciate all of the Visalia area Jewish community supporting the Jewish Federation of Central Valley over all these years. Did you have anything to add, Stuart? Okay. Anybody from Merced that would like to make some, please come forward. And then I want to be sure to have Doug Weil speak about the Weil family.
I'm Carol Drucker, actually Carol Drucker Madruga, and we went to Merced in 1974, and at that time there were probably a core group of about a dozen families that were conducting services in homes and also at Castle Air Force Base. Castle Air Force Base provided a monthly service for the servicemen and High Holy Day services, and at that time Rabbi Greenberg was coming to Merced and Cantor Loring were coming to Merced on a monthly basis and doing services for us. And then we joined with the Hebrew Union College and started getting student rabbis. We became an organization of our own. We're now Congregation Etz Chaim. And in doing research, we found that, like many of the other communities of the valley, the Jews came to Merced. They followed the gold rush. They followed the railroad in about 1870, and they started opening up businesses and helped develop the town. And to this day, we still have a few of the merchants and their families that are still running. We had auto parts, we had plumbing supplies, furniture stores, general stores, the working man store, which had put out clothing for all of the miners would come and get their clothes to go work up at the Gold Rush and in all of the Gold Rush towns above Merced. And to this day, we still have a core group of about 30 people, 30 families, that we conduct services every other week. We have our own Havara house that we conduct our services in, that one of our members has donated to us. And we often use the student rabbi program, but we're not this year. They had very few student rabbis, And so since our group was one of the smallest, we didn't get one this year, but we hope again to be back on the program. But Jews of Merced have been there a long time, and I'm really proud that we still have an organization that finds it important enough to stay together and celebrate holidays and teach our children about Judaism and life as a Jewish person.
Before I introduce Jerry Horowitz to talk about the Michener family history, I neglected to introduce the youngest Fresno descendant of Herman Levy, who's sitting in the back with her grandmother, Judy Boro, and that would be Ashley Affleck. Just raise your hand and wave, please. And I'm not Ashley, that's her sister. This is Michelle Affleck, and she is in the history exhibit as the youngest generation here. Pictures from her bat mitzvah. I'm so grateful she came today.
Okay. Just want to say a little bit about my family's history. My dad was born in February of 1921 in Odessa, Russia. He was brought here by, he came with his parents in, 1924, and he was sponsored by the Smith family who already lived here in the valley. His father began ranching, raising cattle, and in the packing meat plant near Visalia. Dad had his bar mitzvah at the old Temple Beth Israel. He went off to fight in World War II. And during that time, he would write letters to Rabbi Greenberg, and Rabbi Greenberg would read them at Friday night services. Well, my mother, originally from Brooklyn, was at services, and she fell in love with my dad over those letters. So she told Rabbi Greenberg that when Dad came back, that they wanted to be introduced. Soon after, married, and by Rabbi Greenberg. They belonged to the temple where all three sons had their bar mitzvah. Dad played, there was a B'nai B'rith basketball team back then too, and my dad, and there was Mr. Barry, there was Alvin Goldberg, there was Stanton Groger's father. All of those men were on that team. My mom was sisterhood president here at Temple Beth Israel. She belonged to the local Hadassah chapter and even was a member of the caring committee. Mom and Dad lived in Kingsburg for a while and then moved to Fresno, and then my dad with his brother and father bought a life auction company in Atwater, and he would commute back and forth. I know. And he would never wear jeans or cowboy hat or boots. Yeah, now he was a Jewish cowboy, but that was the extent of it. Yeah. But their legacy continued, the Jewish community here in the Central Valley. My brother Stan, who lives here now in Fresno, he married his longtime sweetheart, Barbara Goldberg, and her parents were longtime members here of the temple, and I think the shul. Also, a little known fact was her father, Alvin Goldberg, won twice that Cadillac Dinner Award from the shul. They both went through Sunday school together, got married downtown at the temple, moved away for school and whatnot, and then came back and were very active in the Visalia community. Barbara was a sisterhood past president, also a director of their Sunday school. So their legacy continued. Their two daughters had their bat mitzvahs there. So that's it with the family, and then there's just me and Lee, and you know Lee's story and mine, and we're all happy to be here. Thank you.
I think it's so poignant to discuss the wives of these men and the women who were leaders in the community and founders. They had originally attempted as Jewish women to join the, I'm blanking on the name of the organization, not a Jewish organization. They do community work, and they're all members of the country club, you know. Help me out here. What's that? Anyway, they weren't allowed. This was back in the 20s. So my grandmother, Madeline Levy, founded the Fresno Relief Society, which was mostly Jewish and Armenian women who were unable to join country clubs or social groups. Because even though in the beginning, as Gianna said, there wasn't discrimination, it developed, and that's why the Einsteins became the Eatons. You know, they gave up their Jewish roots in order to integrate, assimilate. But the Relief Society did the same work in the community, taking care of low-income households and so on, and cooking and raising money and giving scholarships to kids. It went clear into the 60s, and then it just, like so many organizations, fizzled. But Hadassah, which was the local chapter that supported the hospitals in Jerusalem, were absolutely extraordinary. And this was the 2012 HMO brunch, which honored Marion and Marty Weil. And what's interesting here is it shows the names. I mean, I know Adeline Richtel was a very big part of this, as were so many of the women in the community. Adrienne Jacobson, the Roseanne Weinberg, Roberta Alexander, Helen Steinbach, Bernice Meisner, Harriet Sigel, Ruth Bricker, whose parents, the Ehrensteins, were very good, big founders of the shul. And let's see, where did I leave off? Donna Morgenstein, Diana List, Maria Vargas, Marianne Cass, Susie Schwartzman, and you'll recognize other names that are here, including the Felixes and Amy Schmidt, who contributed, and the Colettes, Elaine Colette, who contributed auction items and things. It was an organization. I can remember when I was 7 years old and I had a bicycle accident. I went into the living room, and my mother was the president of Hadassah, and the whole board meeting was meeting in the living room, and that would have been 1956. So I know it was very active, at least that long back, probably from the 40s. And then the sisterhood at the temple here was extraordinary, as was the brotherhood, in supporting all of the community and doing fundraising and having events. And it was a great legacy, just a great legacy. Sometime we probably should publish lists of families that were here. It'd be very interesting. Please look in the foyer, if not today, come back and see the names of all the sisterhood presidents, the temple presidents, and I think Hadassah probably has a history. I know Sisterhood published a book one time honoring all the past presidents, and that's quite extraordinary. Who else would like to just make a comment about your family?
Not about family, but I just want to footnote the history. About 7 years ago, when thank you. About 7 years ago, the temple received a letter from the retired assessor for the county, who did history work on cemeteries. And so here's a footnote on our cemetery. At that time, the leaders in worrying about water issues, pipes, were Peter Nagel and Gary Greenberg, and I was president of the Federation. As a result of the letter we received, we did research downtown, went through books and books of county records, trying to get more information on the cemetery. The best we could find was that the cemetery was much, the Jewish cemetery was much larger in the days of World War I. At that time, there was either the B'nai B'rith or a predecessor organization owned the land, and the mayor of Fresno was concerned about a place to bury World War I veterans. And so the predecessor, the B'nai B'rith or the other organization, I can't recall the name, donated about half the land that it had to the city, the county of Fresno. So there was a time, now we're always worried about space in the cemetery. The land was given away.
That's something.
And the organization, which I think was B'nai B'rith, in the early 30s then turned over the land to the temple.
Very interesting. I never heard
And
that.
of course, I just add that Gary and Peter deserve a lot of credit for worrying about water issue, pipes. And if you look closely at a lot of the markers, a lot of the cemeteries, you'll see there are little blue dots to mark the graves of veterans. And every Memorial Day and Armistice Day, we would go out and we would place flags there.
Nice.
Now it's been taken over by another organization. Gary, of course, has passed away, but they're still concerned about it.
Well,
At any
thank you
rate,
for that.
just to say, here we are every year looking talking about how can we get more land, and the land was given away.
Thank you for that. I didn't know that. Would you hand that to Doug Weil in front of you, please? There's a microphone right there for you.
Just briefly, growing up in Fresno, you heard earlier, my father followed my uncle Martin Weil. They went to Klamath Falls, Oregon, because Marion Weil, Marty's wife, her family were big merchants, and they had department stores in Klamath Falls. And so my father followed my uncle there with his new bride, Evelyn, and they decided, let's try to do something on our own. So they, believe it or not, found a clothing store for sale in 1952 in Fresno, and that's how they ended up in Fresno, where they were merchants. They ended up finally with 6 department stores, and then from clothing, it was very difficult to compete with the bigger stores. They saw it coming, so they decided to get into land development, and they ended up in the motel business, which, thank God, they sold, or I'd be a night clerk to this day, I think. But anyway, I just briefly, my mother was very, very involved with Hadassah. Not just temple, sisterhood, but Hadassah she was just so into Hadassah and making sure that they supported the Hadassah medical centers in Israel. And growing up, I remember so many times, like Bob mentioned, you come home and the kitchen table is full of paperwork for Hadassah, programming coming up, fashion shows, brunches. Hadassah was so important to my mother for many, many, many years. And she was invited to it was really neat. She was invited to the rededication of the hospital in Mount Scopus, 1975. And I had to be, at the time, I was in Israel backpacking for 3 months. And I joined them for 2 weeks. And I was able to join them at the ceremonies for the rededication of the hospital, which was unbelievable. Dignitaries from all over the world were present. Of course, it was a great time for El Al Airlines to go on strike. That was leave it to El Al. But it was just an amazing time to be there for the rededication.
That's great.
And it's a shame we don't have that organization active in Fresno any longer.
I'm going to call on Lee Horwitz for a little Horwitz history. Anybody else want to speak? And then I'm going to just mention the Jewish farmers from the days of yore.
Just real quickly, since this is a Federation event, hopefully you guys are aware of at least one of the programs we do, which is called a free loan. Well, when my grandfather died in Texas, my grandmother and her 5 kids went to Los Angeles, and the first thing they did was go to the Jewish Welfare Board and get a $200 free loan. And all I can tell you is that's the smartest money the UJA ever gave, because my dad and uncle made up for it many times. So,
thank you. I think it's very common that we think of the early Jewish settlers not being in agriculture. And you've already heard that the Michener family was in the cattle business. We had Henry and Louis Shane in Madera, who are longtime supporters of the temple here. And I grew up with the kids. Sunday school, and they had a huge farming concern up there. They grew sugar beets and I don't know what all. Very diversified farming, and were great supporters. In Hanford, we had the Himovitz family and the Green family. We had, way before all these families, the Todresic family that were sheep herders on the west side. David, did you ever hear the name Todresic when you were out in 5 Points as a child? Yes. Yeah. They were members of the synagogue, Harry and Etta. They were from Russia. They had 2 daughters, Shirley, who married Mel Freeman, and Marcel, who married Al Endelman, whose shop was next door to the Karsh's, Rose Karsh's bakery down on Fulton. And Marcel had 2 children who were absolutely extraordinary academics. Todd went to Harvard and became a PhD professor at University of Chicago in Jewish history. And Sue Ann Endelman became the director director of all the Jewish community centers in the greater Boston and Massachusetts areas. And these were homegrown Fresnans. And I have to just say that Fresno Jewish community was a village. And all of the kids, like myself, who grew up here, were raised by all of the community. We knew everybody, and they were very supportive, and it was a very loving and a generous community. And I like to think it's still like that, but just a different generation and a different era. Well, I want to thank all of you for coming today. I know it's late. Oh, and we're going to ask Phyllis, who is the executive director of the Federation, to come and say the last goodbyes. She'll close out the ceremonies. And thank you to George and Martin.
I'm not as tall as these other people. Thank you all for coming today, and it's been, for me, a wonderful experience. I've only been here 20 years, so this was really a history for me. I only have a couple of things to say. I mean, I know we've already thanked Bob, but can we thank Bob again? I mean, and his committee, Jerry and Leah and Judy, I mean, they did a fantastic job. Please, give them, and Jack. So I just want to say two things. I want to tell you about our next event, which is going to be the end of this month, June 25th, which is the Vice Sharon Luncheon, and it will be at 11:30, and you do need to make reservations. But I also want to mention this in talking about legacies. One of the greatest legacies we have at the Jewish Federation is Gay Werfel. I don't know if any of you are aware of this, but Gay Werfel was generous and left an endowment to the Jewish Family Services that was fantastic, and because of her endowment, we have every Tuesday and Thursday an exercise class here, and we have many other events that we do, and we could not do this without her endowment. So I have to say, the Werfels, as far as, for me, have been so generous for Jewish Family Services, and we can't thank them enough. And lastly, it's been wonderful for all of you to come. As you know, the Jewish Federation now is located here at Temple Beth Israel. My office is right over there. Jerry is in the library. We have shared space that. So I want to encourage all of you, as maybe on your way out, I'm going to be in the office if you'd like to stop by, if you haven't made your pledge this year, if you'd like to make a donation, because it's your contributions that continue to make us able to bring you these events. And what a wonderful community we really do have. And I'm so happy and proud to be a member of it. And thank you all for coming today. And once again, thank the committee for this wonderful event. Thank you.
And thank you, Rabbi Rick, for doing all the audiovisual and the technical backup that we needed.